able to fit it all in. I might try to combine a couple of the talks, but the five faculties, or they're five spiritual faculties, or they're called the five strengths, are usually listed as faith or confidence, persistence or effort, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom or discernment. And they're skills that we already have to some degree, and that we kind of recognize them and cultivate them as part of our meditation practice, and it helps us develop our practice, and it also helps us manage life experiences, and therefore it benefits ourselves and others. And the Buddha taught that these qualities are some of the most important qualities. I'm always looking for which of the lists is like the smallest, easiest to remember, that still encourages, or one can wake up from practicing. And he taught these qualities as some of the most important ones for becoming awakened, as well as the Brahma Viharas and the 7 factors of enlightenment that we've talked about before in our Tuesday group. And we don't want to get too busily caught up in the intellectualness of it, but to know them as skillful factors can give us a place to let the mind come to when we want to let go of the more unskillful ones. And the Buddha taught that these were awakening qualities. And not only that, but he also noticed that in his own practice that they would lead to success in whatever he would put his mind to. So they're qualities that are useful in any attempt to do anything of importance in our lives. And their primary focus is in the practice of meditation. But the first faculty, confidence or faith, deals with how we view the world and how we live within that world. And so for that reason, it's an aid in training our minds in all the aspects of practice that surrounds meditation, not just meditation. And the 5 faculties are listed sometimes in an order that they sort of ordinarily, easefully develop. And so it begins with faith. And in the Western world, I think, because it has sometimes a kind of detrimental effect on us because of the upbringing and the different definitions of what faith is, it's also been commonly referred to as confidence or conviction, because conviction deals with our views about what's possible in terms of ourself and in our world. And in terms of the world, we're kind of convinced about what's possible and desirable and what we want to strive for. And in terms of ourself, conviction or the confidence deals with what we believe we're capable of doing. In the Buddha's teachings, we're looking for a happiness that goes beyond anything we've known before. And it's important to have a sense of the world that allows for that happiness, and a sense of ourself as capable of finding it. Because this happiness is beyond the ordinary, we can't know whether it's possible until we've reached it, which means that the beliefs that help us reach it have to rank as a matter of conviction, of faith, and not really of true knowledge. They become knowledge when they've produced the desired results. I don't know if you've ever heard other teachers, but Sharon Salzberg has a great book on faith. And she's not the only person, but she has a good description of how there are different stages of faith, different kinds of faith. And I think we're probably kind of familiar maybe in Christianity, but in blind faith. And blind faith has a kind of exhilarating feeling of having a larger sense of possibility, but blind faith kind of implies that you can't question, or you can't examine, or you can't investigate. And blind faith is sort of the end of the road. But in Buddhist teachings, that kind of faith is referred to and expanded as bright faith. Bright faith is just the beginning, and it's necessary and it's compelling, but it's the beginning of faith. And through questioning and putting things into practice and examining them, bright faith then goes into the next stage, which is verified faith. And that relies less on the external forces of what we're depending on, as much as we have begun to see through our practice, and we can build some confidence or some verified faith. It happens through putting something into practice and not just believing what we're told, but we're putting it into practice. And it's not about being gullible. But the thing that's sort of frightening about blind faith is that it doesn't mature into verified faith. But through a constant deepening, it's like something sort of seeps into your bones. And if you've seen the power of love, maybe, you know it so deeply that it becomes something that you don't need to refer to externally. You just know about its depth. And then that then can go into an awakening faith, and it becomes deeper and deeper. So that becomes an unwavering faith. So that's sort of an aside about a sort of a description of levels of faith. But in these 5 faculties, faith or confidence is the first one. And then building on the aspiration and the intentions that are put forward, the right amount of effort or energy, which is the next faculty, that begins to get developed within ourselves. And it develops so that where we can become more skillful on the path and abandon things that are unskillful and that get in the way of the path. So the right effort is built upon faith. We've had a kind of verified faith, and then we can put more effort naturally into the process of mindfulness, which is what comes next. Mindfulness is what remembers what's skillful and what's not skillful. And it also remembers what to do with the skillful qualities and the unskillful qualities when they're present in the mind, and how to develop skillful qualities when they aren't. And mindfulness can then, as we just noticed through our practice, concentration comes from mindfulness, and concentration builds on persistence and mindfulness, in that when skillful qualities are fully developed, they lead the mind to a state of stillness and to peace, and together with a sense of deep inner well-being. The stillness and the peace, then that allows us to detect things in the mind that we might not notice when it's running around and not quite so stable and still. That stillness is developed from concentration. And the sense of well-being from that concentration that gets built gives us the strength needed to nourish our mind in order to keep on the path. Supported and nourished in this way, then discernment or wisdom checks the results of what we're doing to see how they can be improved. And in this way, it's a feedback into the other qualities as well, strengthening our conviction, persistence, mindfulness, and concentration. One of the images, there's a couple of images around the 5 faculties. One of them that I was talking about yesterday is that the first 4 qualities are like the rafters that you put up to support a roof. And discernment and wisdom, the last of those 5 qualities, is the ridgepole. And it's that wisdom that connects them all and makes them firm. And the ridgepole relies on the rafters, but it also ties them together so that they're solid and tight. And these 5 qualities, they're also called strengths. The difference between faculty and strength lies in the intensity. The Pali word for faculty is indriya, and it's related to Indra. And Indra at the time of the Buddha was the king of the gods. And when something is a faculty in the mind, it's in charge. And as you remembered yesterday, you can think of the mind as a committee. I've heard this in a variety of different ways. There's committees that are looked at in psychotherapy and things too, but a strength is a strong member of the committee, and a faculty is someone who takes over the committee and runs it. So when you think of the mind as a committee, it's important to realize that each member of the committee consists of what the Buddha called a bhava, or becoming. And this can sometimes seem a little complicated, but if we think back around the wheel of dependent origination and becoming, as things become, if there are conditions that come together because of clinging and craving and then becoming, then those things are also going to pass away. So ultimately, the 5 faculties, which are helping us, they are part of this bhava, or becoming. And the process of becoming usually entails stress and suffering. And unskillful becomings create blatant stress, and even skillful becomings can create stress on a more subtle level. So this means that our ability to gain awakening and to put an end to suffering will eventually mean that there's a going beyond becoming. There's a going beyond becoming altogether, going beyond our sense of self and our sense of the world. But to get there, it's helpful to create good states of becoming, because the path requires developing, not just letting go. There's still a development. We need an environment that's conducive to practice, along with a set of qualities in our thoughts, our words, in our deeds that lead to awakening. And so this requires that we develop a sense of ourselves as capable of shaping ourselves and the world in the right direction. Not that we're going to push to make things happen, but there's a capability of change. There's a capability of nourishing ourselves on the path. And to develop all these things, it requires a certain kind of desire, a desire around which we build the world in which awakening is possible. and a sense of self that's conducive to achieving freedom. Not the sense of self that we're thinking we have to always let go, like the aggregates, but still there's a sense of self that we need to embrace to achieve freedom. And then eventually that gets let go of. There's the simile about the raft, where the raft is built. We use the raft to get to the other shore. But then when you get to the other shore, you don't carry the raft around on your head while you keep traveling. You leave the raft behind for someone else who's coming across the shore, across the water. And we let that raft go, but we need the raft. So the reason that we need to put these faculties in charge of the mind is because when we make up our mind to practice, lots of times the entire mind is not always in full agreement. You know, the committee members don't all agree. And there's this waiting to sabotage. I can tell you many times when I don't want to get up in the morning to meditate, I want to just keep sleeping. So there's a certain, some member of that committee is sabotaging my practice and wants to get free to pursue my other desires like sleeping. So the question really is, who's in charge? Our moods? How can we trust them? And they get us to do things and then they disappear. Kind of like the analogy of people that get you to break the law, and then when the police come to catch you, those people that were helping us run away. If we identify with the moods, we can't trust ourselves, and much less trust anyone else. If we look outside someone to trust, for somebody else to trust, in terms of the beliefs we absorb from other people, who do we trust to be in charge of defining our world? The media? The education system? The internet? What do they know about going beyond aging and illness and death? We want to be looking instead at the Buddha as someone that we can trust. Someone who says that there's a way to go beyond aging and illness and death, who shows us how to do it. And in particular, advice is given on how to develop these 5 strengths: conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment, so that we put our wisdom in charge of defining who we are, that ridgepole, and the way that we interpret the world. So we keep calling upon wisdom. We've developed conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and then along comes discernment. And that happens just even throughout a sitting. When we ask what's happening in the mind right now, we might have to conjure up a little more confidence or faith, or we might need to have a little more effort. Turn up the mindfulness a little bit. Notice the concentration. So discernment or wisdom comes in to hold all of those 4 other faculties in strength. And when the 5 strengths reach the point where they can dominate the mind, or when they become faculties, then we can trust ourselves to act in our own best interest. 2 of the faculties, conviction and faith, discernment or wisdom, they relate primarily to our views and to acts of attention. And 3 of them, persistence or effort, mindfulness, and concentration, they relate primarily to our intentions and our actions, and all of them are based on heedfulness, the realization that because our actions make a difference between happiness and suffering. We have to be careful about what we do. If we really love ourselves and love others, we won't do anything to harm ourselves or to harm anyone else. But we can't just sit back and watch this unskillful committee members take over the mind. We want to be proactive in strengthening the mind's skillful members. And ultimately, the 5 faculties bring the mind to a happiness that doesn't have a need for desire or a need for becoming. And so at that point, even the faculties get transcended. But to get there, we have to do the work of giving rise to the faculties in our thoughts and our words and our deeds. So it helps to kind of remember what the faculties are. I'm going to post up this little picture that I made. I have to laugh at my graphic skills, but I'm going to share the screen here for a minute. See if I chose the right window to show it. Here we go, share the screen. Okay, so here they are. Around the outside, faith, energy, wisdom, concentration, with mindfulness in the middle. And down below, there's the list. Faith and confidence or conviction, which is saddha. Energy or effort, which is viriya. Mindfulness or sati. Concentration or samadhi. And then wisdom and discernment, panya. And so you'll see my red arrows that connect faith and wisdom, and my purple arrow that connects energy and concentration with mindfulness in the middle. So, just as these 5 faculties are considered individually, and they each perform their unique skills in their respective areas, as a group, they accomplish the task together of establishing inner balance and harmony. To accomplish the balancing act, the faculties are divided into these 2 pairs, and in which each one encounters sometimes the kind of undesirable tendency that might be inherent in the other. And this way the pairs can reach their fullest potential by balancing each other out. So the faculty of faith and wisdom form one pair, aimed at balancing the capacities for devotion and confidence with comprehension and wisdom. And the faculties of energy and concentration form a second pair, aiming at balancing the capacities for active exertion or effort, and balancing that with the calm recollection that arises from concentration. And so within the complementary pairs stands mindfulness, which protects the mind from extremes and holds the promise that each pair will hold one another in a mutual containment, which creates a more of a mutual enriching kind of tension. So when they're developed and they're regularly cultivated, the Buddha says that they lead to the deathless. They lead to total freedom. The quote is something like, they lead to the deathless, they're bound for the deathless, they culminate in the deathless. The other analogy is of the 5 spiritual faculties. They're said to be like a cart with 4 wheels and a driver. If any of the 4 wheels is too small, wobbly, or not in balance with the others, then the going on the spiritual road will be rough. And the four wheels symbolize faith, wisdom, energy, and concentration. And if the driver isn't paying any attention, then there's going to be problems. And the driver symbolizes mindfulness. And so the trick is that faith and wisdom have to both be strengthened and kept in balance as much as energy and concentration. So mindfulness can always be increased. So for mindfulness, the sky's the limit. It's the balancing factor, and we strive to constantly be mindful. So the list can sound kind of simple, but I'm glad because there's only 5 things on it. But there's so much more to it than meets the eye. And on the spiritual path, it's worth checking up on ourselves regularly to determine if the first 4 are strong and in balance, and if we just need to be a little bit more mindful. So faith and wisdom, sometimes if there's lack of faith or lack of confidence, we might become cynical or give up or have half-hearted effort and a kind of bitterness. If there's excess faith, that can lead sometimes to a blind adherence, a kind of dogma, and a sectarian arrogance, like we were talking about sort of today, Doug. Being disappointed or disillusioned when you realize that your teachers don't meet all your expectations. There's an inability sometimes to realistically examine and revise your approach to spirituality when it's necessary. And on that balance to faith is wisdom, and insufficient wisdom can lead to blindness or gullibility or narrow-mindedness or some kind of an agenda-motivated interpretation of the teachings. Wisdom, too, can be distorted by the intellect, and then this can lead to a cleverness or a vanity about our insights. It can lead to sometimes like spiritual bullying rather than mature, heartfelt wisdom. And lack of wisdom can lead to an overemphasis on acquiring knowledge, over practice, and over direct experience. And, we sort of have these desperate attempts to think our way into enlightenment. So that's where you can see that there's a balance needed between faith, confidence, and the wisdom factor. So if there's an excess of intellect, sometimes it's a sign of a lack of faith. And if there's an excess of faith, it can often be marked by a lack of wisdom. And so when faith and wisdom are in balance, there's a heartfelt steadiness, a quality of balanced, genuine inquiry, an ability to persevere with a kind of unmistakable humility. Then there's energy and concentration to balance. The same principles apply to energy and concentration. They have to be strengthened, but also balanced. And if there's not enough energy, there's sloth and torpor, or dullness and tiredness. And if there's excess energy in the mind or in the body, you might be restless or agitated or jumpy or strained, tense or irritable. With excess energy, we might be completely unable to focus at all because we're overemphasizing sometimes effort at the expense of focusing on the object of meditation, like the breath or the seat on the cushion. And with not enough concentration, the mind won't stay with the chosen object of the breath, if that's what our chosen object is. And it'll get lost in thought or snagged by stories. But with excess concentration, we can become strained. Sometimes people get so concentrated that it becomes very narrow, a very narrow, like the reality can't really breathe. And sometimes too much concentration, one can feel sleepy and tired. But it's not because you're sleepy or tired. It's because there's a high level of concentration, but it can seem kind of dull. And amazingly enough, it can be related sometimes to a lack of energy. And so when the balance is right, our posture can be steady but not rigid, and the mind can be bright and focused steadily on the object with interest and the back and forth interplay. So we pay attention to how the practice is going, and we adjust the levels of energy and concentration accordingly, and we can find that the balance takes time and requires regular readjustment, and we can learn to use the power of our minds. Sometimes it's really helpful to be gentle with our attention, as if we're trying to feel the wind on our skin from the flapping of a nearby butterfly wing. And sometimes it's helpful to use our attention like a well-oiled, fast machine. But most of the time, we do just fine trying to find the balance somewhere in between. But we have to have a willingness to tinker with these various combinations of energy and concentration to produce the necessary personal experience to figure out what helps and what's too much or what's too little. And so that's why we try to take some time out sometimes to spend more than an hour at a time for our practice, like in just taking a day for yourself in your own practice. And as the balance of energy and concentration matures, sometimes there's just very little energy. And there can be a lot of concentration, but it seems balanced, and things might be perceived clearly with very little effort. Experience might seem spacious and inclusive rather than narrowly focused and concentrated. And this can be surprising because sometimes we kind of practice, we cling to what might be a less mature phase of developing concentration. And that can feel more narrow and tight. And the less mature phase of developing energy feels very effortful. When energy and concentration mature, the feel is spacious and easy, natural and clear, gentle and broad, rich and subtle, all at once. Everything is just showing itself as the way through on its own. And when we apply effort to practice and build concentration, our mind grows stronger with cultivating an energetic and concentrated mind. We guard it well and direct it to skillful practices and ways of being so that skillfulness is developed as a new pattern deeply in the mind, rather than probably a lot of our older patterns of rage and jealousy and terror and conceit. And so this can go on, but I think I'm going to just make the one comment about the cultivated mind is like a fire. And the hotter the fire, the more it can accomplish useful ends, like cooking food or melting iron for forging. But the hotter the fire, the more it can get out of control and burn things down if it isn't properly monitored. So when we're practicing, particularly if you have an intensive time period like on a retreat, but also in daily life, we have to be careful and respectful of the power of an energetic and concentrated mind, and use it skillfully, like we would any powerful tool, because we're developing these powers and balancing them. Nelson Mandela said that to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but it's to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. To be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. So then we come to mindfulness. I think I can stop sharing so you don't have to look at my fabulous graphic design anymore. But mindfulness isn't a category all by itself. It's there in the middle, or even in the process. If you're not looking at the wheel, but just the list, mindfulness is in its own category. It can balance and perfect those four spiritual faculties. And it doesn't mean that we aren't going to be informed by those two pairs, but mindfulness is extremely important. And it means knowing what is as it is right now. It's the quality of the mind that knows things as they are. Initially, mindfulness appears to be something that we create. We're kind of cultivating and creating mindfulness. If we're trying to perceive the sensations that make up our experience clearly and to know what they are, we're balancing energy and concentration and faith and wisdom. And due to energy, the mind is alert and attentive. Due to concentration, it's stable. And faith might also mean acceptance, and wisdom is clear comprehension. And all of that happens within mindfulness and awareness. Mindfulness means being very clear about our human experience as it is, about being here now. Truth is found in the ordinary sensations that make up our experience. So it might be painful while we're sitting, or pleasant while we're sitting, or if we're not mindful of them or reject those experiences because we're looking for progress or depth or transcendence, we'll be unable to appreciate what they have to teach, and we won't be able to do the insight practices. We realize that we have to pay attention to our thoughts and our words and our deeds. And in order to do this, we try to be mindful of them. We realize that we often fail to pay attention. So we try to increase our ability to concentrate on how we live our life. And in this way, through experience, we become wiser in a relative sense, learning how to live good and useful life and seeing our skill improve and the benefits it has on our life. We generate more faith and so on. Faith can, effort can come out of that faith. And so with respect for training and concentration, we may have faith that we might be able to attain a higher state of consciousness. So we sit down on a cushion and energetically try to stabilize our attention and tune into skillful qualities. And we realize that we can't stabilize our attention and tune into skillful qualities sometimes without mindfulness of the object, of the breath. There we go, back to the breath, or the seat on the cushion. That mindfulness it stabilizes our attention by paying attention to the object. We develop strong concentration, and consistently stabilizing our attention, we can attain deeper states of concentration, and we're able to gain a direct understanding of how to navigate in that territory, the meaning and the purpose of doing this. So the teaching of the 5 faculties has always been explored at great lengths in many books, and there's really a lot of depth and nuance to it. In its simple form, we can apply it, and at critical times, it can really be helpful. Balance and strengthen, strengthen and balance. These are the cycles that we go through with these faculties. And there really isn't a limit to the level that they can be mastered. So it's aptly said that when balanced and perfected, the 5 spiritual faculties, as they apply to insight training, are a sufficient cause for awakening. It is aptly said that when balanced and perfected, the 5 spiritual faculties, as they apply to insight training, are a sufficient cause for awakening. So let's let those words settle down for a moment. There were a lot of words. It's a wisdom teaching. Hopefully those words can flow over you. You don't have to worry about comprehending them. You've been listening to the Dharma, and it contributes to your merit in your karmic stream. So let's just take a moment and let the words settle down. Take a few breaths and notice what might bubble around in your mind about the 5 spiritual faculties or the 5 strengths. Maybe reflect upon what you notice or what might have stood out around some of this. And once again, as always, thank you for listening to the Dhamma. May the merit and goodness of our practice be of benefit to all beings. Let's just take a few moments.
Good night.